Rental properties, dividends, and side hustles, everyone calls them passive income. But how passive are they really? Let's separate fact from fiction in this episode. Stay tuned.
Welcome to a Wiser Retirement Podcast, where we cut through the noise and bring you real, honest conversations about investing, retirement, and building lasting wealth. No sales pitches, no gimmicks, just insights to help you stop guessing and start planning your financial future.
Welcome to a Wiser Retirement Podcast. I'm Senior Financial Advisor Shauna Theriel, and today I'm joined by Financial Advisor Michaela Dowdy to discuss real passive income. What's legit and what's not? If you enjoy listening to our podcast, don't forget to leave us a review. Let's get started. Good morning.
Good morning. Hi, Shauna.
How you doing?
I'm so good. How are you?
Miss Almost CFP.
Yes.
Certified Financial Planner.
Yes, we're so close. The exam has been passed.
I mean,
just waiting for the official certificate to come to me via my email.
How does that feel just to be done with that?
Oh my gosh, it's so nice. I have a life again. I feel like I don't have to go home and do homework, which is such an odd feeling when you're working already. But it is so nice to now actually kind of start picking up a little bit of my hobbies back again.
Right.
Let me cook. Let me go and do all these other things. And stop doing
now there's
the
no
bare
excuse
minimum.
You have to work out, right?
Yes, exactly.
You get to work out.
Yes.
No, I'm so proud of you. It was so awesome.
Yeah.
It has to be a good feeling getting that off of you. That is I don't know that people know that aren't in our industry. It is a really hard test. That is a really, really hard exam. It is rigorous. It's you have to have a certain amount of hours, and then you have to have courses prior to it to be able to even sit, and then sitting for the exam. I mean, it is a monster to take. So
it is, and I'm glad that it is behind me now and it is done.
Well, we're glad too. And then you have to have all your experience submitted before you can use your letters and all of that. So
exactly.
So we just wait. So hopefully by this time it'll be done and you'll have your letters, right?
Hopefully.
It's so exciting.
I know.
But the test is done. So that's the hard part.
That's the big thing. That's the big thing.
That's so awesome. Well, today we're talking about passive income. What is real passive income? I feel like we get this question a lot. It's people come in. It's how can I have a bunch of passive income, and so that I can let my money work for me and all of this.
Yes, especially I feel in the digital age, there's so many different streams now that you see. Whether it be I could create an Amazon storefront.
Yeah.
Or I could, do, I don't know, something on Etsy or, something even Canva I've seen lately where people will make little templates on Canva and sell those. So it's just there's starting to be a very different, view, and it's a lot more accessible to get this other income source than it used to be.
Yeah.
But I feel you still traditionally were hearing about, rental income for the most part,
right.
Rental properties. How can I buy another house, or should I keep my first house that I bought and just turn it into a rental? And everyone refers to that as passive income, which is,
We're going to demystify that a little bit maybe, because it's how passive is it really?
No, exactly.
So the definition, okay, so let's talk about what is actual passive income? What is the actual definition? So the IRS definition, IRS framing is rental activities or businesses where you don't material participate.
Exactly.
So you're not doing anything.
Yes. You have not managed the property whatsoever.
Right. Manage the property, don't have to run the business, don't have to, So it's when you think about when people ask us about exactly what you're referring to, it's well, that's not really, usually you have to have some play in it.
Exactly.
So it's almost semi. And so the other definitions, it's basically income not directly tied to ongoing labor.
Mm-hmm.
So really it's there's active participation, then semi-passive, and then truly passive, where you're not, we'll kind of go through a couple of those. But really, I think the theme is if whether it's passive or not, I think people want passive because then it's your money's working for you. You're not really having to do anything per se. And so it's over here working for you while you can do other things.
Yeah.
So I really think, the theme, I think it's great to have multiple sources of income.
Definitely.
Diversify your income if you
absolutely.
can. Because you never know if something happens to your job or, then, and if you end up retiring, then, you have other income to help offset that and all of that as well. So let's just get into, let's go through those we were talking about. What people think are passive.
Yeah.
So what do you normally hear? I mean, I think you started naming them.
Yes.
Let's talk about each one you kind of mentioned.
Well, I feel like rental properties is the most often one that we hear about, is just saying, I want to be a part of something passive income. I want my money to be generating wealth for me. And it ends up being, okay, I'm going to have a rental property because I've already purchased this home. I'm going to build up my own empire, basically, of rental properties. And what ends up happening is that's not actually passive at all. Unfortunately, your rental property is going to require a lot of work out of you.
Yes.
Even listing it on, okay, we're going to do, an Airbnb, or we're going to do. That requires so much work. Who's going to clean that property? When the AC goes out, who's going to fix it? When, a door gets broken, someone's got to go over there and, fix that as well. Who's going to mow the lawn? All of those different things of just maintenance on the property. Also, who's going to take and who's booking for it? Of course, if you kind of outsource to Airbnb, VRBO, those can kind of take care of a little bit on the short-term rental side.
Yeah.
Now, if you're looking for more of a long-term rental, that's something you're typically going to have someone, a part of your team, that's doing that alongside you if it's not yourself.
Yeah.
And so it ends up being more of an active approach, whether you want it to be or not.
Yeah.
It's not truly passive because of the fact that you are having to materially participate at so many different points typically, especially if you're doing regular turnovers with like a short-term rental.
Absolutely. No, yeah, I definitely. And something else too, it's like, I do like having rental properties, but you're not really diversified there. So if you have a lot of money locked up in like one or two properties, and then something happens where there's a disaster or something, some kind of income interruption where you can't rent it out or something, and then homes do age, so it's going to have to be maintained and redone. So, I mean, it can be a good source of income. But I don't like having it like a huge part of your portfolio. Part of your portfolio, yes,
Definitely.
but that's where it's challenging because the cost of homes is just so high. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
But that's kind of like a side note. But another one, you mentioned online businesses and side hustles.
Yes.
But if you're doing a side hustle and you're selling stuff, or you're doing an Etsy, or you're doing that's not really passive. You're actually doing it.
You're having to do it. Even with like Amazon storefronts, you're having to put everything in the storefront to then get the commissions from people by putting it on your social media.
Yeah.
There's not really a such thing in that capacity as a passive income stream, unless it's something, that you're somehow just giving money to an individual to then pay you back. But like you're not doing anything while they're materially like building up this income strategy. But overall, the side hustles that are out there are plenty of them out there now that you can definitely, market off of online.
Yeah.
But it's something that to say that that's passive income is not really true.
Yeah.
It's more of a semi-passive, I'd say. So maybe it's, okay, you created this online course and it took you a couple weeks to create that course, but people now, 5 years later can still purchase that course online.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Maybe for the last year, 2 years, you really haven't put much work into it, but you did at the beginning.
Yeah.
And so even if it required that upfront work, it's still considered, technically active income.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to like the IRS, because you did materially participate in that.
Exactly.
And so that's exactly, just a differentiator. And I feel like that's kind of the bigger differentiator here that we're even getting at is kind of there's no, with passive income, the passive income everyone refers to, there's still labor involved with it. Typically, it's not something you set and forget,
right? In
the capacity that our modern day,
well, I mean, there's still like marketing of that, and there's still, updating things like that,
exactly.
Or, I can't think of any business unless you're doing something where you're, somebody's working underneath you and they're just using a license of yours or something like that. Then, I mean, I guess that could be passive to a point, but how do you still find those people? You still market to them, and you have to have those relationships, and know. So exactly. I don't know that would be completely hands off either.
Yeah. No, definitely.
Another one is, trading and options. I mean, that if you're, you can have investments, the investments in the market, investments. I mean, that is passive income that's working for you when you're not watching it per se. But if you're actively trading and going in and out of investments and monitoring those investments, I would think that, I mean, you can't just set it and forget it.
Exactly. If you set and forget your options, you might be in a world of hurt.
Exactly. Exactly.
Depending on what you've done.
Exactly. So interesting stat. So even among higher income households, the majority of income still comes from wages. So not passive sources. So, we say the higher income earners, they have all this passive income, but, the majority of their income, 60+% of it is still coming from, non-passive sources.
Exactly.
So they may have multiple sources of income, but, know, so.
And I feel like that's what you see with your higher earners is maybe they don't only have, maybe one occupation, or there's only one occupation for the household or something like that. It's more so, okay, there might be 2 or 3 different income sources that they're, maybe even getting K1s from or whatever it may be. And that's really what's kind of helping them establish wealth is they do have that diversification, but that doesn't mean that it's passive per se. They're not having to put effort into that.
I mean, that could be from like private investments and, maybe some real property dividend paying. So, then your earnings and all of that. So you could have multiple sources to your point, where or maybe you did start a side business on top of that. But none of that is, other than maybe some of the dividends, can be a little bit passive.
Yeah.
So what is actually, we've talked about what's not passive basically, or what people think is passive, because it's like, they want to come in. It's like, how do I create more income that's passive? But what actually counts as legitimate passive income?
Yeah. So one of the bigger ones that you really see, especially, once you're even getting to like retirement, I feel like this is where a lot of clients start bringing this up, is dividend paying stocks and ETFs. So really wanting to have that dividend coming to them, because all you're doing is investing in that, ETF or that specific stock, and they're paying a dividend to you.
Yeah.
Whether that be quarterly or however often, and then they're choosing to, pay that out to their investors. And then at that point, you're getting that income stream effectively.
Yeah.
But then you're not managing the business you invested in.
Right.
You're not managing the ETF that you invested in. Someone else is doing that. A fund manager, a CEO, whomever it may be, is then in charge of that. So it's not something that you're materially, participating in. And so that's where we really, see that as a big passive income generator and a big, topic. I feel like that a lot of our retirees like to bring up because they want that secure income stream during retirement.
Yeah.
And so it just gives them a little bit more security.
Well, and everyone's like, how can I just, I've heard people say it's like, how can I not spend from principal and I can just, live off the income? And it's like, well, if you're truly talking about the cash flow piece, you have to have a lot of money invested, depending on what you spend, to be able to just live off what is generated by cash flow.
Yes.
But I mean, I always look at a combination of, cash flow and growth, portfolio growth. It's like, many times if you're invested appropriately and your withdrawal rate is within the 4% rule, if you will, then what happens is you end up, retiring, having an account at a certain value or assets at a certain value, and they continue to grow over time. So, but are you spending from principal? I mean, maybe some of it, because if you're talking about true principal, and, I look at appreciation and dividends too. Just living off cash flow is tough, unless, depending on how much assets you have. There's also other investments as well. Bonds and fixed income that also pays that cash flow and that, interest rate as well. Real estate investment trust. That's one way to be in a passive investment, and get income, have a little more diversification. So this is one that is truly passive: business ownership with operators.
Yes.
So that's kind of like what you were describing. So it was like, maybe you buy into a business.
Correct.
Or you start a business, but then you hire somebody to manage it, and they're doing the hiring and the whatever, and they're running the business, and you're truly only getting the net income from it, and you're not having to touch it.
Yeah.
So people do it all the time where they invest in a business and they don't have anything, where they get income from that. I mean, that is truly, I guess you could step in and take over if you own the business. But you could buy into a laundromat or purchase a laundromat or start a a tea shop and hire somebody to manage it. I say that because my middle daughter is starting her own little tea business. So, or will be at one point. But, you could have a fact where you buy a business and then hire people to do it and then you're not really doing it.
Yeah.
So,
exactly.
I mean, that would be a true passive income.
Now I have a question, and you might not, I don't know the answer to this, but it just came up to me as we were talking through this. If you were a business owner, and you sell your business, but you keep a 10% stake in the company for income, but you're no longer managing.
Yeah,
like you're a business owner, you sold your business,
you sold 90% of it.
Yeah, you sold 90% of it. You just keep enough that 10% ownership so you can still receive income from the business, but you're no longer managing anything. You've completely stepped away. Is that active or passive income?
I would say that's passive.
I would think it's passive too.
Yeah, because you stepped away from it. You're not really actively participating.
Yeah, I was just curious because at one point you were actively participating.
Yeah, so I would think that would switch.
Yeah.
And it matters for, reporting purposes of active or passive and all of that too. But most people think of it as, how can I make money without having to, I don't want to say think about it, but actively participate in what's happening.
Yeah.
Annuities is something that is passive income, but I don't recommend annuities generally. But that is considered a passive income as well because it's the type of investments. So interesting stat here too about investment income. Michaela, do you want to talk about that?
No. So investment income. So whether that's your interest, your dividends, capital gains even.
Which is that growth we talked about.
Exactly. And so that totaled about 1.6 trillion in the US, which is really just shows how significant asset-based income really is, especially at this scale.
Yeah.
So just being able to participate in the market and really investing in these stocks, ETFs, bonds, fixed income, or even REITs, really can give you that passive income that I feel like a lot of our clients are looking for. Yeah. It's just maybe this is the true passive way to do that.
Well, interesting. Like when you're looking at this list of what is true passive income, it's really ownership of assets. It's not running a business and managing a house and doing the rental property. It's truly, I suppose if you had a rental property and you had a management company that handled everything and you didn't touch it, you could be that. But it's really just about ownership of assets and it's not really like a strategy of, hey, how can I have passive income? It's really having enough resources and savings to be able to own assets that are passive.
Definitely.
Really. So it's not like you can just strategize and say, how can I get there?
Yeah.
I mean, you can obviously from savings and investing, but it's really about ownership of assets.
Definitely. Before we jump back into the episode, do you know if you are ready to take off and launch into retirement? Get your pre-retirement checklist, a free guide from Wiser Wealth Management. From cash flow to Social Security, we've got your countdown covered. Go to wiserinvestor.com/guides to download your free guide today. Now let's get back to the episode.
The trade-offs that no one really talks about, so one is like investing capital versus your time. So, I would say that our most valuable resource that we can't get back is time, probably. Yeah. And so if you think about, being able to take that money, but of course it took time to make that money usually, unless you have an inheritance of some sort, so capital versus time, which is, that's a huge trade-off there. What else? Liquidity.
Yeah, liquidity.
Being locked up in something.
Exactly. And that's even something huge of, what was it? It was a real estate syndicate. Is that right? That we
syndication.
Had? Yes. And that, you just don't get liquidity out of that. It's really hard to actually ever see your liquidity come back from that, from the experiences that we've had with it.
Yeah.
And so just, something like that, like, yes, maybe you're investing in it and it is relatively, passive income at that point.
Yeah.
But you've just lost all liquidity of those funds and there's no guarantee you're going to receive those back. Granted, do most investments come with a guarantee? Of course not.
No.
But absolutely, of course not. But it's something that, definitely just even making sure, though, that you have those liquidity needs available to you.
Yeah.
If something were to happen and you needed those funds. Because, also though, depending on, your net worth or where you're at, then maybe that risk is worth taking.
Yeah.
But just making sure that you have the appropriate liquidity needs, available to you are huge, especially when it comes to these passive strategies. You don't want to be, sending out all of your capital
right
in hopes for there's an income,
right.
coming back your way, and definitely making sure there's always a contract on those sorts of things as well.
Yeah. Where your money's locked up, whether that be, even in real property, if you're investing in something and, the markets could change, that could change in anything too, of course. But if you're counting on that income, you want to make sure that you do have enough, because we spend cash flow. We don't spend assets, right? So we spend cash flow. So you want to make sure that you either have the money set aside for your expenses, or you have enough cash flow coming in from multiple sources to be able to cover that. And if some of that gets disturbed, that you have a plan B, of how to cover it for living expenses, either cutting back or, covering it, because you don't want to, you don't want to sell when, like any investment, you don't want to sell when it's down. You don't want to be a distressed sale. So you don't want to be like, oh, I need access to this capital. You have this private investment and maybe you have to sell it for, pennies on the dollar, or you have to take a haircut to be able to sell something like that to get out of it, if you even can. Or on a real property or rental property, a distressed sale where it's like, well, I need the capital. I have to get out of this now. And then you're just going to take a lower amount because you need access to the capital. So definitely thinking about all those risks as well. Also taxes. Yeah.
Taxes is huge, especially considering if you have true passive income, you have to be so careful, because if there is a passive income loss, that's not something you can take against your active income.
Right.
So while yes, maybe you have, had an incredible year, you're earning 400 some odd $1,000 or plus, and then you have a passive income loss. Well, that's just going to sit there if you don't have any passive income gains.
Right.
Or income, and so that's where it's just something to note that for passive income, it's a lot more specific.
Yeah.
Especially on, when you can even but when you can even claim those losses on your tax return.
Absolutely.
Now, something to note though with that is a difference with like your real estate professionals is if, you or your spouse happen to be a real estate professional and then you start having rental properties, then you can typically, claim that then as an active income loss.
Yeah.
Regardless. But of course, then that's changing it to active income, because now you're using that professional status associated with it. So there's an adjustment there that maybe your management doesn't change. But as we've already discussed, real estate really most of the time is not passive in and of itself.
Absolutely. You have to look at the risk versus the yield. So, are you locking up a lot of your capital here? Is the time and the effort, or is the amount of capital you're putting in there, what percentage of it is your portfolio? Whether it's real property or, a private investment or a REIT, et cetera. And then what is the potential return on that? Is it worth it? If you could earn the same thing in a publicly traded stock, I probably would do that.
Exactly. No reason to take on unneeded risks.
I know. Or like more work or something. And like general rule of thumb, if you don't understand the investment, don't invest in it.
Yeah.
Like if you don't understand what's happening, I wouldn't invest in it, So sometimes, people do trust their advisors, and should, if you have a good advisor, if they say, there's an opportunity or, what have you, to look at something. And, if you're not trained in that field, you may not understand even how a stock functions. You don't want to be completely out of any investment, but, if it's really complicated and there's pages and pages of words that explain the I don't know. I'm just very leery about, the small print. So
no. And you want to know what you're getting yourself into. Definitely.
Right.
Especially when you're taking a risk like that with a lot of your capital.
Absolutely. So you'll have to look at that. So the top 10% of households own about 89% of the US stocks. So top 10% of households own 89% of US stocks, which is so interesting.
This just seems like a mind-boggling fact to me.
Yeah. Yeah. If you think about 10% of people own 89%.
Like only the top 10% of households.
Yeah.
Which I'm assuming the top means the top income earning, the top 10% of income.
Probably. I would assume so,
households.
Yes. So that means that because if we're saying, U.S. stocks is one of the passive income, that means most passive income is really concentrated among the wealthy.
Yeah.
But I promise you, I have watched over my career of 29 years. I know you've been doing this, a long time too. I've watched people go from just starting out savings to building that wealth, and there's no trick to it.
No.
It's being disciplined. It's not living beyond your means. It's saving as you should and investing, appropriately over time, and just having that discipline of, not taking on a lot of debt, and you can grow wealth and get to that top 10% of household.
Exactly.
And it's really important to do that. Just not because you want to be the top 10% of households, but because you want more choices, as time passes, it just gives you more choices and, I don't want to say freedom, but more choices to be able to make your own decisions and be retirable.
Definitely.
And comfortable.
Yeah. And I feel like that's the big thing and we even kind of have this on here there's not really a shortcut to this.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I feel like you're constantly seeing online is here's a shortcut to wealth, basically. And unfortunately, that's not how it operates. It's kind of like your body,
right? There's no shortcut to being healthy.
There's no shortcut to being healthy. Unfortunately, you cannot have chocolate cake every day and drink soda all day long and think you're going to have a really healthy lifestyle.
Just like you can't overspend and get a bunch of debt and buy stuff you don't need and think that you're going to grow wealth.
Exactly.
Same thing.
It's just, unfortunately, there just has to be those momentary sacrifices. And maybe they're not even, we're not saying big sacrifices, but it's just those little okay, I'm not going to go through we're not going to go out to eat at this restaurant, today, or we're not going to, do this certain spending and buy that thing today. It's just certain, opportunities that you just kind of say, that's not in our bigger picture.
Yeah.
And that's not going towards the goal that we have for wealth. And I think that's what sometimes gets so, especially in our society of everything's instant.
Yeah.
I mean, now you can get any question practically answered instantaneously by whatever AI you choose,
Yes.
And so, and if you don't like that AI's answer, go to another one and maybe it'll give you a different one, And so, it's just something that it's so instantaneous, I mean, even our TV now is, we can watch whatever we want on demand, it's just, there's nothing. It's very rare you have to wait for that much anymore.
Yeah.
And so I think because of that, it makes people try and get in on these passive income streams that it's you won't have to think about it. You'll just become rich overnight. And it's too good to be true. It's too good to be true.
It probably is. Exactly.
And so it's just one of those that I hate to see, clients, just fall into that kind of trap. Of thinking that that's what's going to happen, especially our younger clients.
Yeah.
Because, they're just trying their best and trying to figure out how to navigate it, especially if their family wasn't having conversations with them about it.
Yeah.
And so it's just really easy to get, take all of the large plethora of information that we have out there and try and run with the wrong one just because it's the most prevalent one out there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So obviously there is no quick way to do it, but how do you build passive income the right way then?
And I mean, really, this is kind of what we were just saying is you have to know your goals. And I think that's the big thing is if you can actually know where am I wanting to go?
Yeah.
And I think that's a big thing is understanding that you're planning for a long term. For most, people, you're planning for the long term. And maybe, of course, you have short-term goals.
Yeah.
There's also got to be long-term goals out there too that you're working towards. And then, I mean, we have a book, Hero on a Mission?
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite books that we read right when I started working here. I was required to read it. And it was so pivotal for me, honestly, to understand, okay, well, what are my long-term goals that I have? And it's, okay, 10 years out, I want to be at this point in my career. I want to have this for my family. I want to, be at this personal goal, whatever it may be. And it's okay, well, now paring that back, where do I need to be in 5 years to be at that goal?
Right.
Then it's okay, well, then from that 5-year mark, where do I need to be in 3 years? Okay, from that 3-year mark, where do I need to be in 1 year? And then you can find your baby step.
And that's where the habits are created.
Exactly.
Because that's what it is the habit creation to get you there. Yeah. It's losing 1 pound at a time or gaining 1 pound of muscle at a time or, saving $10 at a time. So it's like creating that muscle of you just get better and better over time. And then you have that momentum behind you,
Exactly.
So that's where the habits, so you have to start with the end in mind, right?
Yes.
And it's like work your way backwards. I love that, Michaela. And then, start building those habits towards that.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
And then once you start kind of building that habit, then it becomes something where you're like, you start to really feel that difference of, I this needs to go to this savings account so I can build towards this, housing goal that I might have. And it's like, okay, well, if I want to buy that house and this is going in automatically, well, say you overspent the month before and you're like, crap, I've really got to pay off my credit card.
Yep.
Well, then, okay, realistically, I don't need to be paying 29% interest or whatever on the credit card.
No.
So then, okay, then what I need to do is I just need to pare back savings. Well, now you're going to feel that.
Yeah.
So you're going to say, I just shortchanged my goal. I could have had another $500 in that account, but instead I'm paying off a credit card because I didn't limit my spending.
Yeah.
And so it's really just having then that dialogue with yourself.
Yeah.
And then you can really start to feel kind of those pain points. And it's the same thing of like, we were just talking about waking up early. It's, those first couple weeks of trying to wake up earlier are awful.
Yeah.
Typically it's trying to get your mind in that new routine.
Yeah.
Especially if you're naturally like a night owl or something to that effect, but you're trying to be more of a morning person. It can take a lot to get your body adjusted. But once it gets adjusted, you can't imagine going back to it.
Absolutely.
And so that's where it's just really building that consistency.
Yeah.
And I think having that consistency with investing, consistency with savings, and that's really what builds your wealth and builds it generationally, because then like your family, your kids, they're all seeing what you're doing.
Yeah.
And then that's where it becomes a generational habit, not just a, personal individual habit. It's you're also, teaching the generation below you or even the ones, above you, kind of what to drive towards.
And I mean, truly, kids do what we do. They don't do what we say.
Yes.
So if you exhibit that, that doesn't mean they'll always follow your lead. But if you lead yourself well, they'll generally, that's where we learn a lot of our habits for like, health and wealth, all of that. We learn that when we're younger. So if you're exhibiting those habits in front of your children, they do what you do. They don't do what you say.
Yeah.
So they follow what you do. And also focusing on, you said, obviously consistent investing, diversification, being diversified, and then tax efficiency to try to make the most of what you have. And something I always say to clients, and I've seen this over and over again, I swear to you, the first million is the hardest to make.
Yeah.
I know that sounds crazy. It's like $1 million sounds like, so much money, but it truly is the first million. It feels like it takes forever to get there.
Yeah.
But once you get to the first million, it just, you have that momentum, and then, the market helps, or the diversification, or, how you play if you're constantly going in and out of the market or selling stuff when they're down, or, making these moves emotionally, that's not being consistent. That's not, it's, you really truly have to stay the course and, play the strategic long game. So roughly, interesting stat, roughly 2/3 of Americans still rely primarily on earned income. So, that just reinforces that passive income is built over time. It's not immediate.
Definitely.
And we did another episode how there's a large percentage of Americans that are living off Social Security as well.
Yeah.
So they didn't have that savings, or they didn't, they weren't consistently saving. So where it's a lot of their income.
And so I really think here it's just, we talk about too, just building up that strong active income. So, wherever you're getting your primary earnings, and then you're able to invest that consistently and, really investing that into the market, saving towards whatever goals you may have for the future. And then, letting then there be an ability to, whether you create passive income by investing in specific, strategies that we were talking about, those dividend paying stocks, or if it's something that you putting capital towards a business that you're not managing.
Yep.
And so then those are really those areas where you can, but you first have to kind of take care of your primary, concerns first. And then it can become, that passive income can become an addition, not something you can just take from the beginning.
Right. Right. Absolutely. So, just what passive income actually looks like, median passive income is only, like actual passive income is only $4,200 per year for households that actually have it.
Yeah.
So it's It's really small.
Yes. And it's because it's so limited what's actually considered passive.
Yeah.
I feel like if maybe we were to take like the modern definition of passive income, I hate to even call it modern definition, but more of what people claiming mean when they're saying passive income, then I think it would probably be higher if you're thinking like rental property income. But when we're looking at true passive income, that's
what the average is, basically, so it's really having an expectation of what you're trying to do. I mean, really, I think most people are just mean they want multiple sources of income, which is good, like I said, because it's kind of diversifying your income.
Of course.
So, bottom line, it really starts small and scales with time, discipline, and capital, really.
Yeah.
So, so just really kind of in closing, passive income is real. It is it's rare at meaningful levels early on, but it can over time. Most passive strategies are partially active. They're not truly passive. And the most reliable path is, like we talked about, that long-term investing and ownership of assets is really the passive income approach.
Definitely. And it's just a majority of what you talk about in the modern day passive thought process is more so just that, semi-passive strategy is really what we're actually seeing.
Yeah.
So you are still having to manage some aspect of it. It's not just that you're going to completely be able to wash your hands clean of everything and say, yep, nope, this is just going to grow for me and I'm going to get a deposit into my bank account.
Yeah, absolutely. So really, if you're trying to build passive income, don't start with a product, start with a plan, figure out, start with the end in mind, what you're trying to do, what you're trying to build, and then create the habits that get you there.
Yeah.
Because the people that actually live off passive income, they didn't find a shortcut. They built it from the ground up, and backed into it.
Yeah.
Sometimes you fall into it, but we can't just go through life just hoping something happens to us. We have to, be intentional about things. And know, and you can change things over time and adjust your goals and your plan, but going in there and taking charge of your own life and not just letting life happen to you like that,
100%.
Yeah. Well, thanks for listening to today's episode. If you're interested in learning more about Wiser Wealth Management or want to schedule a consultation to meet with one of our fiduciary financial advisors like Michaela, new CFP, you can do so by going to wiserinvestor.com or you can click the link in the episode notes. We'll see you next week.